Hello, everyone. It's Absolute Spirit here for the third entry in our dialogue series where we talk about some practical and personal philosophical concepts and sort of build this community that we're developing. Thank you all so much for being here. We're so happy to have you. I'm Alice and this is Matt, and today we're going to be talking about death. What does it mean to die? Where do we go when we die? What does it mean to be alive? Are we dying consistently throughout our lives? Generally, I would say yes, I think so. Let's get into death.
By the way, this is a requested topic from from within our community.
Yes.
So if you want us to talk about something in the dialogue, please feel free. And if you subscribe to our Patreon as well, which is on our channel banner, you may be invited to a dialogue to participate.
Yes.
So just want to throw that out there before we begin. So let's begin. Do you have any initial thoughts, like deeper thoughts?
Yeah.
I can also start if you're not prepared.
So for me, like, death is kind of a big part of my life. I think I feel like my sort of ego and identity has died so many times, and I've become a new person at so many phases in my life, both in terms of like transitioning in terms of gender and like coming out publicly as like a trans woman. There was a lot of death that happened there, but also just in terms of a lot of death of old toxic habits and old toxic ways of viewing the world. I don't drink Monster Energy anymore, and that felt like a death because it was so integral to my identity. It was integral to both like my experience of the world. Like, I was super caffeinated, and that was like what I thought reality was because I was experiencing this super heightened caffeinated state. And it was also integral to like I loved like having a Monster in my hand. It felt like a comfort. It felt like I could say like, look, this is me, this is who I am, it's this Monster can. So like things like that throughout my life, so many deaths. And at first it was really difficult when I was going through all those deaths, like, and every death was painful. But now I feel like in my life, when I leave something behind, when something falls out of my life, there's still pain sometimes, but I really feel like a sense of joy and like rejuvenation and rebirth in a positive way. And I'm always happy for change now, and I'm much more embracing change and living in the flow state. Yeah.
Very I don't know how you would say, like, Heraclitean?
Yes.
Heraclitus core. Heraclitus pill. Everything's always changing. Nothing's ever the same. So in that way, kind of death is a constant. And like, obviously, as a very like, Hegel-oriented channel and Hegel-oriented community, Hegel-oriented internet platform, Absolute Spirit,
Yes.
we're constantly putting that out there, that things are always in a flux, always in a change, and always in that sort of way dying. Identity isn't this really constant, fixed notion that, a lot of Cartesian flows of thought might want to espouse, might want to, put forth, might want to posit, so to speak. Rather, it's this very fluid notion, Personally, I think that happens through dialectic, which is kind of a death, right? The negation, negativity. We take things, propositions, identities, beliefs, instances of knowledge, even perhaps, and we subsume them under a new truth, and in doing that, it becomes a new thing, and a part of it dies. Not that it's forgotten. I think an important aspect of death maybe is remembering, because it's like if something like died, if it's like truly gone, you know what I mean? And in that way, I think in a lot of way too, to like, on the even a personal level, if like, loved ones or friends or things that have passed away, part of me like thinks that, they're not like ever truly gone, in the sense of, there's this like pretty cliche quote that's thrown around out here, not even like a bad way or anything. I think it's quite true. I'm endorsing here that, you only truly die when you're forgotten. So that's kind of like, you live on in impact and in memory. And I'd even like radicalize that quote and take it a level further, so to speak, because I think that even if like people don't consciously remember like your name or your like, exactly who you were, or like why you did what you did, or any of your motivations or anything else that you would associate with your identity, it doesn't take away from your impact on the world, or what you did to change the world. And those are essentially the same thing, but something that like really like made this concrete for me was when we were in the forest planting some plants, which you saw some footage of at the end of the last dialogue. If you haven't seen that, by the way, please check that out.
Yes.
The professor who was with us was telling us about the large ecological and environmental history of that, and how we're in our very own small little way adding on to that large timeline. And that's just not something that anyone can really ever take away, I think. And I guess a possible objection to this is something that lots of like existentialist philosophers, I think it was Nagel who brought this up. He said that humans are constantly looking to find a higher cause to align with them, but his thing is that we always run into this kind of problem where like, what's the purpose of that higher cause, and then what's the purpose of that higher, and then it's kind of ad infinitum. And my answer to that is that I don't think it goes on forever. I think there is a kind of moment, there's sort of like a reflexivity of consciousness where you get so far abstracted and you kind of like put it back. And that's really abstract and hard to understand.
I'm a little lost.
Yeah, I can elaborate. I was at, a few nights ago, I was at a talk by a Hegel scholar, Klaus Viehweg, and he was really fascinating, and he really elaborated on Hegel's idea of the eternal present, and he really thought it was encapsulated most by Dutch art, because Dutch art at his time was really just painting. It was essentially like taking a picture. It was just like a completely ordinary kind of thing. It just like people like dancing in the street, or just a town being a town, people walking, people shopping, and it seems totally mundane. And for Hegel, it was the most profound art he had ever witnessed. And the reason for that is because in Hegel's view, there's a sense of the completely contingent, the completely historically mundane, the completely everyday activities, the what he called like the kind of passivity, just going about your everyday life and thinking nothing significant of it. And then we have these ideas, big grand ideas of higher causes, like eternity and God and the infinite. And we tend to kind of separate them because of, to be honest, lots of metaphysics. Like, for example, like Cartesian dualism. I bring this up, I feel like, a lot because it's just the most easily accessible example. Or even like Platonic dualism of like, actually that might even work better in this case, because we think like the eternal, the heavenly is always outside of our grasp, and this is always kind of a fleeting moment of the perfect idea. And for Hegel, that's totally not true. For Hegel, he's like a monist and an absolute idealist, which means that everything comes together in this reality. The sense of kind of the grand, the infinite, the beyond is separated from us is totally incorrect for Hegel. I mean, it's a step in the right direction because at least we're recognizing that there's a grand infinite, but this is why he puts down like romanticist art and modern art of religious paintings, because that's kind of transcendentalizing what is already here. And so by pairing the infinite, the grand infinite, with the mundane community through a painting, because by painting you're eternalizing the fleeting moment, that's the joining together of the particular and the grand universal narrative, and finding it together is really what glues it together. And so Nagel's criticism doesn't really hold up because he's still transcendentalizing that grand ideal, that grand narrative, and by realizing that all the grand narrative that will ever exist is already here in front of us, and all the meaning is here. That for Hegel is the eternal present. And personally, that's how because this was a topic from our community that wanted to get spoken about. You know, like how do we cope with loss, and how do we cope with death, or the fact that we will die? It's not because I think the default view is kind of like we need eternity to last forever for things to be meaningful, right? There always needs to be some sort of end goal to reach, a fixed end point, that unless we reach that point and that point lasts forever, then everything we do is meaningless. And like I think it's like a screwed up, almost capitalist kind of way to view it,
Yeah,
right?
so
Like we're working
true.
towards this fixed goal, like, and we're producing this like
We need a
end point of
reward.
history. And if you realize that history doesn't work like that, and that view of history is what Hegel would call a prehistory, we weren't really free. Hegel's view, that's like metaphysical slavery. You're enslaved to this idea of an end goal that you're constantly like working towards. By liberating yourself is immersing yourself in the eternal present, realizing that eternity is, was, and always will be here for as long as consciousness exists. And consciousness ending isn't really like a meaningful like idea. Like it's sort of the opposite. Like I think the fear is like life is meaningless. It's almost like death is meaningless. It's kind of life is the only thing that will ever matter. And just by living in the moment and realizing that eternity is here, the universal is within the particular, that is the most meaningful existence you will ever possibly be able to get ever. So that's kind of my view on it. It's a very Hegelian notion of an eternal present. Sorry again, that took a little while. I think Hegel's concepts take a little bit to explain
Yes.
fully, but hopefully that makes sense now by what I mean
that
by
was,
kind
I
of
feel like I have a lot
subsuming.
of clarity
I'm glad.
and
Okay.
understanding now, at least personally. And there's a few things I want to respond to.
Yeah,
in there.
please.
So,
Please dialogue back at me.
and
And you guys too in the comments or however you want to
please
reach
feel
us.
free to engage with us. We love to hear from the community. Truly, it always warms my heart so much to
Mine as well.
see people commenting and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And living in the eternal present.
Yes.
Now please dialogue
Yes.
back at me.
So yeah, one of the first things I want to go into is kind of what you were talking about reminded me of this idea of like presence, right? So like being in the present moment, being here and seeing the sacred and seeing like the holy and the all this stuff in the mundane aspects of our life, right? Like making a cup of tea and having that be a sacred thing that you're doing, a sacred ritual, going for walks, having a sense of wonder for these things that we often perceive as just mundane, as just small, right? Because when we try to, like you're saying, try to make it too transcendental, too large, too grandiose, we lose the purpose of being here. Because the way I see it is like what we are is like consciousness. We can have a transcendental experience at any time. It's possible for consciousness to like, set itself through like incredible transcendental experiences, but we're here in this life to love and to do these mundane things and to have this experience, to be present here and now. And to me, that's really beautiful, and that's what I want to do with my time here is have that presence and have that cultivation. Another thing that you mentioned was kind of the way that we interact with the land and the world, like as what leaves our mark, right? Like what our contribution is, how we live on past our physical death. And yeah, I think that's really a cool thing to think about as well. And something to think about is like, well, if our contribution is what we're doing to help the land and to help our community, then let's do that, right? Let's help the land, let's help the community, let's focus on this instead of destructing the land. Because right now, our legacy as human beings is like a whole sprawl of cities and like ugly capitalist landscape, at least like in a lot of parts of America. I'm not saying everywhere, right? Like, of course, people have incredible like eco villages and all this sort of thing. But here where we live, industrial like nightmare landscape is our legacy at the moment. And I think that can change, and I think we can change it, and we can contribute to that. And one more thing, yeah. When you were talking about death and like death being kind of meaningless, I want to push back on that a little. Like,
Yeah, please negate my notion. Let's advance spirit.
I feel like death is super meaningful. I feel like, like yes, letting go of like past and like letting ourselves die is important and worthwhile, but I feel like we can also honor that death. We can honor that death when it happens, and we can say like, like for me as a person who's experienced a lot of like personal death in my life, like not of other people, like death of self is what I'm referring to here. Although some death of people and a lot of loss of friends and that sort of thing. And when I experience like a death of a self or a loss of a friend, like it's like I want to let that go and let that go with love and like honor it and honor that like moment in my life or that person in my life. And maybe they're no longer in my life, they've moved on, they went their way and I went mine, but like the time that we did share together was meaningful for that. And yeah.
That's a good clarification, because I accidentally people could probably take it as if I'm like discounting that, and I totally did not mean to. And that actually I think supports what I was saying earlier about like remembering, because what is death if it's not like remembered, because then it essentially just doesn't exist. More so what I was getting at was kind of just this idea of like pure non-being, because obviously that's like death of something that already was. I was talking about like total like just void, like ex nihilo. That's kind of like meaningless. It's indeterminate. There's nothing there. And I think all things are at least a part of that. And obviously consciousness, like people don't live forever. Your self-consciousness will eventually reach that point, but that's okay, because that's also part of the eternal present. The eternal present and dialectical growth and everything that goes into reality is all like part of necessity, based on for Hegel it's three things. It's logic, the form of thought, it's nature, the kind of laws and habits and doings of nature, and three, of spirit, of us, of our self-reflective understanding and how we act and how we actualize our spiritual ideas of
shout out to the Absolute Spirit cover page.
If
you go on our YouTube, it says nature, spirit,
logic. And that's why everything is meaningful. That is what makes the eternal. These are the three things that comprise the eternal present. And everything is always as it should be because of that. But also that doesn't mean we should just surrender to this like Robert Brandom. He wrote a book called Hegel's Spirit of Trust, and I think I haven't like read all of it, but I've read some excerpts, and essentially Zizek responded to it, and he wrote a piece called The Spirit of Distrust, because the idea is we shouldn't trust in this grandiose, abstract, transcendental spirit that will guide us to some like almost quasi like fundamentalist religious view. No, that's not what Hegel's advocating for at all. Hegel's saying we live in the eternal present now. It's being made now, and you are part of it, and you are an active agent. So even though it's all kind of determined, you're a part of that determinacy. You determine life. And so your role in this eternal present is to consider totality to the best of your ability and to act. And that will really lead you to where you need to be. And you've kind of been doing it your whole life, whether you realize it or not. Watching this video right now, that's what you're doing. Talking here, that's what we're doing. We're all living in this eternal present, and all the forces of reality comprised of logic, spirit, and nature are all coming together as they should. And we are actively shaping it as it should be. So we have a say in reality as it should be. Not obviously unlimited. We're not omnipotent. We're not the entirety of logic and spirit and nature.
But we are consciousness. And
we're a consciousness. We're a part of it. We're a part of that.
We are self-determining as consciousness, because
within some capacity,
what we are is consciousness expressing itself as human. And so we are like determining the course of reality.
Yes, in part.
Wow, super cool.
And that is always meaningful. Because of people like to make it contingent, and it's like, oh, it could always be this way, it could always be that way, but no, it can't. No, it can't. We're certain ways, and you will act in certain ways, and you will do things, and that will shape it, and it cannot be any other way because of how that works.
I feel like this kind of brings up like the idea of like the consequences of our actions.
Exactly. You're like totally responsible for them. You are, and that's scary, but that's okay, and you're gonna make mistakes. But those mistakes are exactly what should happen as well.
And it's so, mistakes are rough. Making a mistake hurts, and then like going back and realizing
sort of death, right? It's death in a way too.
Oh wow, like I might have lost something in my life that could have been valuable to me. I may have caused harm to others because of like an action that I took, and that's a really hard thing to wrap your head around and to accept. Yeah.
But don't forget that it's also part of something greater and something that is the greatest.
And the mistakes are helpful, right? We learn from them, and they're necessary to advance spirit.
Exactly. To advance all that there
continue
is.
on our path, yeah.
And there isn't something more than spirit that is somehow outside of it, that like somehow this greater death will cause. Like, death is part of spirit, just like everything else.
Yeah.
And it will
so
come
true.
as it should, and it hasn't come yet, and so it shouldn't be here yet, and so we should act as we should until it comes. And when it comes, we should be dead. That's just how it works. That's how I think it works anyway.
Yeah.
That's my Hegelian, quasi-Hegelian view on death and how I cope with it, because I'm supposed to be where I'm supposed to be,
Yeah.
and I'm actively sort of decision making and you know, making sort of not really like, you know, heuristical calculations, but sort of just like, you know, taking in my environment and using my spontaneous self-activity as a self-consciousness to enact my own will and hopefully subsume under the greater thing and align my particularity with the greater universal, and hopefully come together and make videos like this and
Yes.
live life as it should be lived, and yeah, and like Alice said, full of love and awareness and all these great other things that we have talked about, and that we are talking about, and that we will be talking about.
Yeah.
So if you're into that stuff and into what we're saying,
Yes,
or disagree,
come hang out.
yeah, come hang
speak
out,
to
come join our
us.
community, come advance spirit with us, because it's not going to advance without us, and you're here to advance it,
Yes.
whether you like it or not. No, I don't mean that in like that's our nature, and it's lovely, and we're so glad that you're here, and I'm
Yes.
glad that
So
you're
true.
here,
Oh yes, I'm glad.
and I'm
you're here as
glad that
well,
we're
man.
here,
Yes.
and it couldn't be any other way. It shouldn't be any other way, and it is good, and it's eternal, and I'm so fortunate and to be able to comprehend that and act in light of that.
Yeah,
So,
I'm so grateful to be here. I feel like that's something that I really find important in my life, for coping with, well, not just for coping with that, more for coping with life, to be honest.
yeah, coping with life is a big topic.
We talk about
Maybe
coping
that-
with death, but life.
Maybe we should leave that for another dialogue. Maybe that could be this follow-up.
Yes, we can maybe do life next week. By the way, our goal right now is to be doing dialogues on a weekly basis, so
Yeah.
you can expect to be hearing from us more and on a more consistent level.
And streams every Sunday,
Yes.
starting tonight.
Yes.
You're still-
Yes, absolutely. We're gonna
Awesome.
play some fucking Minecraft.
Probably. Or other games.
Yeah.
Game suggestions
yeah.
are welcome.
Or just talk. But,
and topic suggestions are welcome, as always.
I also wanted to mention something I love when talking about death, which is mushrooms.
Yo.
Like just seeing them in nature, and seeing what they do and what their role in the environment is, because they are there at the birth of life, and they're there at the end of life. They help to decompose organisms. They exist to break things down. Often they pop up on dead trees to help break those trees down and turn them into new fertile soil for new plants. So they're helping to end that life and helping to bring it back into the nature. And so for me, thinking about death, I love thinking about it in that context of my body will go back to the land. My body will be used to fertilize the soil, and that's so beautiful to me.
And in death, our consciousness goes to spirit.
Yeah, that was the next thing I wanted to bring up, was do we want to talk a little bit about potential thoughts on afterlife, rebirth, that sort of thing?
I think I mean, I don't have many views on this, and I kind of implicitly espoused it earlier and a little bit explicitly there. I guess
Yeah.
I'll elaborate a little more on what I just said about spirit going back into consciousness. It really just goes back to this idea of what I was talking about, is everything as it is as it should be, and death is a part of spirit. And so if everything eventually, somewhere along the timeline of the development of spirit should go back to indeterminate non-being, then so be it, and which is the same as pure being. And who knows, maybe there's some sort of Eastern rebirth, because as you see in Hegel's Science of Logic, as soon as thought and determinacy enters pure being and non-being, becoming is birthed dialectically, and life begins, so to speak, of thought and of nature and of spirit all at once. It all happens at once too. That's a kind of important, I think, at least to my understanding of Hegel. If anyone interprets Hegel differently on this, let me know. But to me, like, logic and nature and spirit are always like at once happening. There's not kind of like this sequential component. They're all simultaneous, and so your reality is kind of like, there's being, non-being, there's nothingness, and which means there's everything, and then we think and determine and thereby limit, and then, which is another important thing too. Life is a sort of like death. Life is a limitation of indeterminacy. By negating indeterminacy,
Right, I'm in a body. I'm here.
we're limited.
I can
Subjectivity
only
is
reach
limited.
my arm this far.
This goes back to what we were talking about in the last dialogue too. Like, subjectivity is always a consequence of the greater substance being
Yeah.
limited. So realize that you're not like the absolute. You're not God. Sorry, if you believe that. There's lots of spiritual notions I just disagree with for this reason.
Yeah.
Not in like a disrespectful way or anything. I just think
And
it's
not
kind
that-
of metaphysically wrong.
Not that like you're not God in the sense that like I think you are God in the sense that you are consciousness, right? But you're a fragment of that
Right. For me, it's a
consciousness.
Spinozist notion of like you're an expression.
Right.
and,
right.
and a limited
expression of-
finite expression. You're a finite part of the infinite.
Mhm.
Is a good way to think of it, maybe. So that's kind of
Yeah,
my view on
love
death.
that.
Is that, if the traditional notions are right and it just does go to nothingness, we'll just be back in pure being and pure non-being, and there's nothing wrong with that.
And do you think that? So, well, I guess I'll maybe talk about my
Yeah, go
thoughts
ahead.
on it
Go
first.
ahead.
Because for me, like, I sort of have the same thought of like that's where we ultimately go, right? Is like we enter some sort of like or leave this like perspective and return to the whole, return to the one,
Mhm.
return to source, and then we are back in that source. And
We
are
could.
back
I don't
in
know.
The everythingness
Yeah.
is kind of my thought. And back meaning like complete lost sense of identity, like like no
complete indeterminacy.
right. But I do kind of like to think of some sort of like middle point, some sort of like we die in this life and then there's a midpoint and we get to have some sort of afterlife journey, and I have no idea if that's true.
Yeah,
Or,
I'm like
um,
inclined to disagree with that, just because that's not that would be a determinacy, and it could be. I have no idea. But
it would imply the existence of a more like firm soul as like a thing.
yeah, a sort of platonic idea maybe. But yeah, I just think honestly that's like the only reason I disagree and don't think that would happen in your framework is because you're kind of saying return to source, and source is definitely not that. Source is just pure indeterminacy
Well,
from my point of view.
So what I mean when I say that is like, so there's a midpoint in the sense that like I die and I go to this other plane, and like my kind of consciousness goes
Oh,
into,
like you as an individual,
Yeah.
but consciousness as a greater like spirit moves on.
No, so
Oh, okay.
so what's happening is like, so I die and my soul kind of goes to an afterlife,
Mhm.
right? And in this afterlife, it's also a finite thing. So there's also a death point in that afterlife, and that afterlife is kind of where we get to like tie up our loose ends and like be with people that we care about and like have more
A traditional like
interactions.
religious notion maybe of like a heaven-ish.
Yeah, heaven.
At least in that way.
But like definitely more like unique and personalized.
Mhm.
And so like at that point, so we have this like secondary life kind of thing, where we do more things and have more meaningful connection and experience a sort of paradisical like reality, like we get to work things out in a place that is better, or more enjoyable, beautiful and pristine and that sort of thing. And then like either like on our own time, like when we decide, or some other time when someone else decides, we sort of kind of like make a choice or have a choice made for us to die in that life. And when we die in that life, then we truly go back to
That's the
indeterminacy.
indeterminacy. Okay.
We like go back to
So that's the
being
midpoint,
nothing.
I
Yeah,
see,
that,
okay.
it's a midpoint in terms. Like, have you ever seen The Good Life, or not The Good Life? What is this? The Good Place. The Good Place.
I haven't, sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
I'm a culture.
If anyone has seen that, you know what I'm talking about when they like they walk through the gate at the end.
Was that like the Amazon show?
No,
where
I don't
like,
think it's on
where it's like
Amazon.
people who are dead just walk around like as virtual beings.
No, that's a different thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Darn.
No, it's
I
okay.
Je ne comprends pas.
I think you would really enjoy The Good Place. There's a lot of
You
philosophy.
can watch it.
That would be super cool. But anyway, not to get too far from the topic. So yeah, and I'm very interested in the idea of rebirth. I don't know if it's something I buy into fully, but I feel like there's definitely a plausibility there for me, especially just in like personal like dreams and other like spiritual experiences I've had. I sometimes like as a kid I would sometimes get these senses, and like as an adult, but especially as a kid a few times, and especially as like there's like specific points in my life where I'll have these kind of like really intense, what almost like feel like memories of like a really distinct other existence as like a different body and a different person. You know, I don't know if those are credible or not. I would not say I like believe firmly in it, but I know that it's something I've experienced, and it's something that feels like real to me, at least to some extent. So it's something I wonder about if it has a realness to it, and if perhaps as a soul we go through multiple lifetimes and then die and then return to indeterminacy, or you know, something like that. So I think my approach to it is like what I'm getting at is that like ultimately I believe in a return to indeterminacy. However, I don't know when that happens. I don't know if there's like an afterlife, like a midpoint. I don't know if rebirth might be a thing, and those are things that I'm not really willing to like put a firm one way or the other on, at least at this point in my life, because of like experience and also just staying open, you know.
Yeah, and for me it's because of like I agree, but maybe for different reasons. Because kind of in Hegelian philosophy, it's kind of like a consequence of how reality works, that you can't know the future because you're active in self-determining and like determining the world, and other forces are that you just don't have complete knowledge of and like never will in full detail. And maybe even they don't. Like everything kind of like is an active living thing in that sense of like it's not this like Newtonian or like Cartesian like determined universe that's kind of just like, it's not like watching playback on a video. It's like we're making the video always, and everything's always making the video, so to speak, and eventually it might finish, but like the end is not determined, but it will be determined, and you can't really watch it back unless through memory, which is always limited. So for that reason, I think we can't look ahead, and I don't, so I don't know what's gonna happen. The last thing maybe for me too, I think I want to respond to sort of your inclinations that you're saying you were experiencing of like these like other life. At least for what I'm studying in psychoanalysis right now, in grad school, it definitely sounds like the other life you're experiencing is like your unconscious, in terms of like your unconscious self, so to speak.
Right.
I think it's trying to tell you some things. I'm not gonna try to psychoanalyze you live on camera, nor am I like really able to. I think I'm not trained at all.
Yeah.
I'm taking my first graduate level Freud class, so this is all new to me. But from what little I do know from there, because Freud I think had patients that like would describe things like that, and he would very much be able to kind of like pinpoint that to like certain desires and sort of like wishes or fantasies, or even like past experiences that you're like repressing maybe. Which is to me seems more plausible, and definitely worth investigating. That's kind of what I have to say on that. I would say definitely I think it points more to that at least than to some reincarnation or afterlife, but not saying that's totally off the table, because like I said, from a Hegelian point of view, I'm kind of like inherently an agnostic about the future, except for what I like have planned and for my own will to enact upon it. But that's a very loose, like definitely just idea, like unactualized, not real idea, and sort of literally just a projection, my own projection. So definitely has like very little bearing on reality as a whole. That's what I have to say about that.
I think this seems like a nice place to wrap up.
So hopefully this was helpful.
Video.
Let us know. Like I said, this was definitely a request from the community, so if you have more, please let us know. We'd love to talk with you. And on Patreon, I will have to get on there and make a tier to have you guys on here. That would be a open thing otherwise, but that might get too chaotic, and we definitely want to keep it to like a structured like conversation that's able to be communicate intelligibly rather than sort of like a 3 a.m. Discord call with your friends or like a high outside of a Wawa conversation. Not that those are wrong or bad, but just that's not what we want to make this dialogue series. You should totally get high out of Wawa at 3 a.m. talk about philosophy. That can be very helpful for your growth.
Yes,
it can be.
yes.
Don't want to say it definitely will be.
Yeah,
But
and certainly too much can certainly be detrimental to
for
growth.
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
But that's where we're at. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for being with us
Dialogue.
today, and wherever it is in the future of you're watching that I can't determine and is actively being determined right now, which is super cool.
Yes,
and you
are
have so much
living
potential,
in the present.
and go out in the world and act and create spirit as it should be, because you're in a necessary part and you have drives and things that should be there, and the world should be a certain way. You have a place in shaping that, and death will come as it should too. So act as you can until you can't, because when you can't, you shouldn't. So it works out.
Yeah, happy spooky month.
Yeah, this was kind of more of a spooky
Death,
dialogue. Death is
spook-
traditionally a spooky topic, and it's
spook.
October, Spooktober, otherwise known as. So
Yes, maybe we'll put a fun filter over the video.
something like that. We'll actively determine it in life. So thank you so much again, and we hope to see you in our future videos. Join our community if this is your thing, or if not and you're curious about it, or whatever the case is. We encourage you to join us on our journey.
Thank you so much for being here. We love you. We're so glad
Much
that
love
you're in the
always.
world. And yeah, goodbye.